Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure connecting today, and thank you for joining us for the DORA webinar. Is your organization ready? What we will do today is we will start by a quick round of introductions to I will start myself. My name is Jalil Nexam, Client and Partnership Director at GEM Server Talent Group company. And Ian, if you would like to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, certainly, Jalil. Ian Davis, I'm the cyber lead for EMEA within Talon, and I've worked for more than 20 years on the cyber security aspects of legislative and regulatory compliance.
Brilliant.
And I'm Camilla Winlow. I lead the data privacy for Talon as well. So one of the things that we do is help organisations build their privacy control frameworks internationally and incorporate new legislation. It's going to admit an extra person. Looking forward very much to sharing this webinar with you.
Very good. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today. I will start by giving you an overview of Talon as an organization before we go into the actual DORA regulation. So if we could go to the next slide, I will start without further ado. So Talon, just to give you a little bit of background, if we could move to the next slide as well, is a company that is headquartered in Paris, that has been providing advisory, IT advisory and consultancy for decades. And we are a global organization working in 5 continents with key alliances with partners such as Microsoft, SAP, CrowdStrike, or Cyjax. So within the IT general consultancy, we have over 100 dedicated professionals for cybersecurity, whom are highly certified, and also data privacy expertise within our core competencies. So we have a broad range of customers in various sectors such as finance, energy, industry, healthcare, transport, public service, telecom, and retail. Obviously today, because of the nature of DORA, this will be more applicable or more perhaps pertinent to finance and insurance. And if we could move to the next slide, please. So we've just highlighted here some of our valued clients who are working in the financial sector. We've done work here as well, supporting the Financial Conduct Authority with more than 15 global regulations and standards. So that's just providing you with a quick overview of the coverage and all the various standards and frameworks that we can support our clients with, and that we have fine-tuned over the time, and we have a lot of experience there, to support our clients worldwide. So if we could move to the next slide, please. And this is just to give you this is very much like a Deming wheel, and this gives you an overview of all our various services, and risk management being a core component, where we assist our clients with the various standards we covered already in the previous slide. So I will not dwell on this too much, but we have also developed a customized threat intelligence service that allows organization to monitor potential threats as a preventive measure to put in place the right controls to limit the potential impact of a cyber attack and understand the cyber threat actors that could be targeting your organization. So this service has gained a lot of popularity since it was created, and we're seeing a lot of our clients showing more and more interest into taking proactive actions and in that field. We also have a lot of technical expertise throughout the group, and we can support clients with penetration testing, with various vulnerability management, security operations centers, and cloud security, posture management, and other cloud security services. And that's just in a nutshell some of the services we have developed, but we are constantly focusing on developing new solutions for our clients, and we will always be happy to, should you have any specific requirements, to run an assessment and to try to see if there is a solution that can deliver value to your organization. So I think that's pretty much it from my side. That it marks the end of my part. The only thing I would like to add is that this webinar is being recorded so that it can be played later on. And for those who couldn't make it, there will be the ability to watch the webinar afterwards. And the other comment I wanted to make before I finish is that if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them directly via the chat, and we will make sure to answer all questions at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for listening, and I will hand it over to the next section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kai. If I can have the next bit. You may well have seen other content about DORA previously. The bulk of what we're going to cover on this webinar will be after this section. Ian's going to go through the requirements and map them to standards that you may already be familiar with. But I find that it's very helpful when you're looking at a new law to understand why they've put the new law in. And that's something that I think often gets missed. So I'm just going to spend a little second on the next slide, if you don't mind, Kai, looking through exactly what it is that made the EU decide that DORA would be useful. So there are certain goals, and there are some challenges that they are intending to address with the regulation. This isn't me making it up. There's a whole extra section to a law which gives context to it, which is where this is drawn from. But as I said, it tends to get missed when people talk about them. And I find it really helpful to go through it because it helps you to understand what they're trying to achieve. And that can be really helpful in understanding how to implement it in your organisation. So going through the goals, the first issue they had is financial services are critical national infrastructure. Society doesn't function without financial services. And so the EU and the regulators were finding that there was lots of other kinds of regulations and other things around sort of resilience, but there was nothing specific to cybersecurity and digital resilience. And what that meant was that we were ending up with a bit of a patchwork with member states trying to put things in. And that then brings you into the challenges where we're saying here, you end up with a fragmented, inconsistent regulatory system, which for any organisation trying to work across borders is no good. And it harms the EU because it makes it more difficult for organisations to grow, prosper and enter the EU market, when coming into one country means you're going to be doing something different when you move into the next one. So you end up with this challenge where you have not enough information about what digital resilience needs to look like for the EU financial sector. Where it is coming in, it's patchy, it's inconsistent, it's difficult for organisations to understand what good really looks like. And now we have DORA to help. So it's designed to set what those standards are, make sure that the regulatory and supervisory environment that you're operating in is consistent, and also help with that piece that I was talking about with market competition, freedom of establishment. So it's easier for you to choose where you want to operate in the EU. and to grow your business within the EU. And then the second piece of that as well is there is, particularly with cybersecurity, information sharing can be massively helpful because it allows you to track threats, understand threat actors, and get much better at sort of warding them off, protecting against them, detecting them, investigating and prosecuting them. And so they were looking at, like, what is it that is causing issues around information sharing? And some of that can be data protection challenges, and some of it can be that there just isn't a legal framework to do it, or a practical framework of parties who are tasked with it. And so again, DORA is here to address all of that. So the goal at the end of it is we end up with an additional layer to the regulatory framework that should make life much easier for operating within the EU. You've got one set of standards that you need to address. It helps you with all of those sort of qualitative cybersecurity challenges. It's not just about how much capital do you need to put aside, it's also what do you actually need to do to keep your organisation and your customers and employees safe. And then finally, that it supports organisations sharing computer threats, intelligence, information security threat intelligence, and feeling like there's a framework to do that without those data protection concerns and without feeling like you might be sharing competitor information. So we have all of that in here. So hopefully that bit of context helps to explain why, when Ian starts going through it, a lot of what they're asking for is quite familiar, and why actually, hopefully, you'll come away from this session feeling like it's very achievable to be ready for DORA when it comes in January. So if I can have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to very quickly go through what the impact and applicability is across the three main categories that are covered by DORA. So it talks to regulators, large financial organisations, and then what they call micro entities. So essentially you can think of that as startups. And there are different types of intentions and regulations that are within DORA for each of these three different organisations. So for regulators, they are intended to build this harmonised cross-border regulatory regime. So they need to be harmonising those inconsistent controls. That may happen over time. The guidance will become more consistent, but that's the goal here. They'll start receiving information that they're not getting at the moment, and that includes incident reports, but also third-party supplier intelligence as well. So they start to become a repository of information that they can share in the system. And so here you can see them sharing threat intelligence with other supervisors, and that can include non-financial services supervisors as well. That might be useful. And their role then is to be providing guidance and techniques that help financial services organisations support their incident response. So it gets much better at protecting the organisation. For large financial services organisations, the plan is to reduce your compliance burden, as we've talked about, but it also sets out these requirements, which is what we're going to go through next, around governance structures, policies and culture, third-party supplier insurance, incident reporting and penetration testing. And it also makes it a requirement that the board has to be on board. And we know that that can be a challenge because depending on the board members specifically, some of them have a much better technical grasp of this kind of thing than others, and that can make a huge difference. So by making it a legal requirement that the board needs to be on top of this, it gives CISOs, CIROs, much more ability to actually have really useful conversations with the board in organisations where that might have been challenging in the past. So if that's resonating with you, board training is going to be the answer to bring them up to speed so they can really lead this. But when we get into the micro entities, the very small businesses, the startups, the fintech stuff, it is looking for something that's lighter and more proportionate. And the reason for that is because the large financial sector is obviously covering almost all transactions, almost all customers. And therefore, most people and most of the infrastructure is protected through the large financial sector regime, which allows them to have a lighter touch that makes it easier for new competitors to enter the market. So we have this lighter regime, it doesn't mandate specific risk management approaches, and it excludes some of the requirements such as supplier management oversight, again on the basis that if those organisations are following the lead of the large financial sector, then they can rely on the work that the large financial sector is doing to keep them safe as well. So next slide, please. So this is my final point on this introductory section, and that is to say you have a lot of freedom on how you comply with DORA, which is really useful. So it should be very much a build on what you're doing already, potentially a simplification. So you have these 6 areas of your risk management model that you need to have covered. If you've done that, and they are, you know, quite clearly as we look at them, pretty standard aspects that I would hope would be in your risk management model, you are at liberty to do what you want. It's not mandating anything more specific than this. So it's asking you to identify threats, protect and prevent them, detect them when incidents and breaches happen. You need to have something in place to detect them. You need a good response to and recovery process. You need to have the ability to learn and evolve over time. So it needs to have continuous improvement built in there and not be static. And then finally, it needs to have a communication element to it as well. So that could be regulatory communication, but also just generally thinking about, you know, who do you need to communicate with when these things happen, and make sure that you're doing that in an effective way that's controlling the risks. So that's the end of my section. I'm going to ask to move forward, Kai, and then I shall hand over to Ian, who's going to go through the specifics of what is covered in DORA.
Great, thanks, Camilla. So I'm going to cover now, just going to go over all of the requirements that an entity must meet when it's looking at complying with DORA, and it's a fairly broad area. If you just move on a slide, please, Kai. And it's a fairly broad area. We're going to look at 6 main areas, 5 of which are directly relevant to the entities who are undergoing compliance, and 1 is a broader area which I will cover, but and highlight why there's relevance there. But the first thing that will probably strike people is that a lot of this should be familiar when we talk about ICT risk management, third-party risk management, operational resilience testing, incident management, information sharing, etc. When we look at that, what's probably the key difference with DORA as opposed to a lot of the other compliance regimes that an organization might have is its relationship with ICT, because in most regulatory compliance regimes, frameworks, ICT tend to have a role of providing the controls to meet the regulatory requirements, and they're not the subject of the compliance activities. So that's a bit of a difference here, and that's sort of reflected as we work through each of these areas. That's reflected that there is that nuance of we are directly looking here at the ICT function through this. Now, each area is quite broad, so what I'm going to do is go through each area and just highlight some of the key areas of what we need to do to achieve compliance with DORA, and also where we can leverage any overlaps or crossovers with other compliance activities that we may be doing. An often frequent reaction to this is it's another piece of compliance that an organization has to undertake, and it's just increasing the compliance burden that is being pushed onto an organization. So we'll look at where we can look at what we're already doing and perhaps leverage that to meet the DORA requirements, so that we're not starting with a blank piece of paper for each of the requirements. So first up, if you could move on, please, Kai. First up, we're looking at ICT risk management. So again, one of the core words here is ICT. So we're looking specifically at that technology piece. So a lot of aspects to this. What does it ultimately mean? Well, firstly, we need to define the responsibility, the ultimate responsibility for ICT risk. And if we think of compliance frameworks such as ISO standards or NIS 2 as examples, ISO talks about top management. With NIS, we've got that focus on board. And with DORA, that's what they're looking at as well, is that there is that senior management body that is holds that ultimate responsibility for ICT risk. That may seem fairly straightforward, but I actually think that's quite a challenge for a lot of organizations, because every organization that I've been into and looked at this with, and was with one a week ago, they will say, yes, we do this. We have representation from ICT at board level, and board does consider ICT risk. But the reality is that by the time risk gets up to the board, it's been rolled up into a single strategic risk. And that's a common approach. So the board may well see that rolled up risk, but they don't really have a substantial degree of visibility of the risk burden that ICT have. So there is some work to do there in many organizations to make boards more aware of what is actually happening within ICT, particularly from a risk perspective, to do that. We also need an ICT risk management framework that includes strategies, policies, procedures, etc. And again, my sort of way of looking at this is, what we don't want to do is go away and design something that is new, something that is specifically done just by ICT, but is done differently elsewhere. So the key to this is looking at is our existing risk management frameworks, are they fit for purpose, and can they be used for this requirement? Because where possible, we want to have a common approach across the organizations, and in ICT we want to be doing the same, or having the same approach towards risk management that we are in other areas. And Camilla mentioned one of the issues that would behind DORA is this approach within that tends to happen within financial services, taking a more quantitative view of risk when we look at ICT, rather than actually looking at qualitative aspects when we're looking at addressing risk there. So we need to look at our risk management frameworks. And again, organizations will already have risk management in place. There is significant overlap here between ISO standards, NIS, NIST, etc. We just need to make sure that what we're doing in the organization works within ICT and will give us what we need in terms of management there. We need to, and this one may seem straightforward, but it's another problematic area in terms of scoping and documenting protocols and tools that are used to support operations. ICT is, I would say, very rarely fully and completely documented. And a requirement here within DORA is that we need to know what systems we have. We need to document those systems, their operation, their scope, their boundaries. We need to know the protocol and document the protocols that we're using within our operations, the tools that we use to support operations, and we need to have allocated accountabilities and responsibilities for those. So it is a little bit deeper than what some organizations may be used to in that. And I think most organizations that I've been involved with, if they were to hand on heart look at their ICT documentation, would struggle to say that it's fully there and they've got a complete grasp on all aspects of the systems that they that support their operations. So we need to monitor and control ICT operations in terms of identification systems, protection, prevention, detection of breaches, and then response and recovery. And we've also got to be on top of backup policies, procedures, restoration, recovery, etc. Easiest way to do that is to establish and maintain a business impact analysis that has the associated continuity and resilience plans and keep them updated. So it may seem fairly straightforward, but there are some particular areas there that I think organizations need to particularly look at, particularly around the documentation of systems, particularly around how they escalate risk and how they bring risk to the attention of board, and how board then provides direction on that risk back down through the organization. Okay, if I could have the next one, please, Guy. So third-party risk management. So this has been separated out from the overall risk management framework requirement, because more and more third-party risk management is a key component of ensuring that we do have operational resilience, primarily due to the way that technology has moved and evolved over the last decade, and the increasing dependence that organizations have on third parties and service providers, particularly as we move more and more into outsourced cloud services, etc. So we have to have a strategy for risk managing our third parties, and as part of that, we need to know who our critical suppliers are, and then we need to understand which operations that we carry out are dependent on those third parties, so that we can fully understand where those dependencies in our systems operations exist. We need to then manage the risk associated with third parties as part of our overall ICT risk. So it's no longer a case of out of sight, out of mind, or that is their responsibility, or we've got an agreement in place. We need to actively manage the risk through service management of those third parties, understand the risks that are involved, perform our due diligence, be aware of conflicts of interest, and make sure that we fully understand the risk that those third parties could have on our ability to operate ourselves. We need to monitor and control ICT operations in relation to those third parties, whether that is through the cessation of contracts, the establishment of new contract provisions with replacement service providers. We need to make sure that we know all the risks that are involved there. And then one of the last items around key contractual provisions. So we must have a set of obligations that form part of a contractual arrangement with each third party or service provider, even if they are long-standing third parties of our organization. We need to make sure that we have those key contractual provisions in place. Now, what DORA doesn't do is give us the wording for what those contractual obligations should be. So it is up to each individual entity to determine what are these standard obligations that are going to form part of these contractual provisions. Now, there is substantial crossover in some areas, for example, with EBA and outsourcing. I think as well there's the European Security and Market Authorities, their guidelines on outsourcing of services, where we can look at those as to the sort of things that we need to look at in terms of contractual arrangements. But we do need to make sure that we have designed and built these standard obligations and that they do form part of a contractual arrangement with our outsourced providers or third parties. If I could have the next one, please, Guy. So digital operational resilience testing. This is quite an unusual one in that it's very specific around testing. Usually regulatory compliance frameworks state that we need to conduct testing. What DORA has done here is expanded on that to make sure that testing encompasses the entire scope of our ICT estate. So it includes the testing of all systems, all tools, and make sure that we understand the threats to the ICT systems that we have. And that then leads on to testing programs, including requirements for threat-led penetration testing. This is where we look at our testing programs and we tweak them and focus them on areas where we know there are threats that are looking to potentially exploit that. So if we understand the threats to the organization, then we can gain some knowledge of how those threats operate and how they tend to attack an organization and how they tend to penetrate environments. So there is that requirement there that we test our systems, and that includes those provided by third-party service providers. We test those systems based on threat intelligence, and we then address any findings that come from that testing. Now, we can use internal testers for this. We can use external testers. We can use a combination. The only caveat on this with DORA is that if we do use internal resource to test, then every third test must be done by an external. And when it comes to external testing, those testing providers must be certified by the relevant member state that's there. So whichever localized area the organization's in, and for those that are spanning multiple member state boundaries, then your testing may also need to be by different testers that are certified in each regional area. If we could have the next one, please, Kai. So incident management, ICT related incidents, what are they looking at here, and what do we need to do? We need to have an incident management framework and process in place that identifies, classifies, and reports all ICT related incidents. So we're looking here at not just a response, but we're also looking at firstly at identification and effectively the triage of incidents, so that we're able to understand what is the potential significance of that incident, what is the potential harm of that incident, to make sure that we're then allocating response based on prioritization. We must have centralized reporting for those incidents. So we must we must uplift what we're doing in terms of reporting frameworks to ensure that all ICT related incidents are reported, and we must ensure that we test post-incident to ensure that incident course is mitigated. So we need to, the testing that we've already looked at in relation to business as usual testing is then expanded to make sure that when we do then have an ICT related incident, we are then testing post incident resolution to make sure that that we understand what happened, why it happened, and what do we need to do to mitigate that to prevent reoccurrence. And if I could have the next one, please, Guy. So information sharing, this is a new one, although there are similar requirements within ISO 27001. It doesn't fully go to the extent that DORA does. And I think this particular area will be quite challenging across the entire sector. What they're looking to achieve here is to develop cyber threat intelligence information sharing mechanisms across the European Union's financial service entities. That way there can be a common understanding of who the threat actors are, what are the techniques that are deployed by each of these threat actors, i.e. what is their individual modus operandi, if you like, for attacking an organization. How do they get in? Is it through, for example, phishing? Is it through social engineering? So they're looking to raise awareness across the financial sector of where are these threats coming from, how do they operate, and are we resilient enough to be able to resist these threats. This goes against a lot of history in terms of not just within financial services, but wider sectors as well, where what we have is sensitive corporate information, and we may not particularly want to be in an information sharing world with those that we may consider to be direct competitors within our sector. And so there is a tendency to sort of look at this and go, well, you know, we're going to invest significant amount of money into cyber threat intelligence, for example, and then we're just going to share it with everybody, and we've paid for it, and they're getting the benefits. There is a tendency to look at it sometimes that way. What the high level aim of this is, if everybody is doing threat intelligence and looking at cyber threat information and is sharing what they know, then we will build up a much broader, much more comprehensive knowledge of the threats that face the financial sector to that. So there's almost a look, we understand that, you know, there may be reticence to sharing information that's coming from something that you've paid for, but it's for the greater good, and if everybody is sharing, we're all better protected. So I think this will be problematic in the early days, but it's something that entities do not need to do. You must notify your member state competent authority that you're going to participate in the sharing arrangement, and you must also notify them that if you decide that you're no longer going to participate in that. I think when we look at this, we as a cyber security person, I can understand that there may be reluctance here. But if we look at the significant threats to the sector, the broader that knowledge is across the sector, then the better that is for everyone on that. So it's something that I think we'll keep an interested eye on as time progresses as to what is the take-up in terms of participation in these sharing arrangements. And if we could go to the next one, please, Kai. And so oversight framework, so this is a bit of an odd one out in that it is not, there's no direct comparisons to this with other regulatory requirements, although you could say that requirements for entities to interact with competent authorities in, for example, NIS, NIS2 is similar. But here we're looking at something that operates at EU level rather than individual member state and down to individual entity level. So it's more an informational area in that there is an oversight framework. And what they're looking to do is identify and designate critical service providers with a view to having a very broad and deep understanding of who are the really important organizations that provide services into the financial services sector within Europe. So this framework will be operating at EU level with an oversight forum, a lead overseer. It will look at investigations and inspections to oversee system critical providers and provide ongoing oversight. So this is something that at individual entity level, there's no direct impact other than the communications channel that will be open between an entity that is required to comply with DORA and that entity's competent authority in terms of assisting with the identification of service providers, so that this oversight framework can then look at is this service provider somebody that we need to designate a critical provider for the overall sector. And if you could move on to the next one, please, Kai. I think I'm handing back to Camilla. You're on mute, Camilla.
I am muted. It had to happen to one of us. So Ian's taken us through the what of DORA implementation. So I'm now going to look at the how. So I've only got 2 slides. I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. So if you do have any questions, please pop them into either the Q&A or the chat, and we'll pick those up afterwards. So if you can move on to the next slide, Kai. The 2 slides that I'm going to take through are going to be our approach to how you tackle something like this. And then we're going to look at where we think some of the traps might be that might affect you, so they can be something you can reflect on. So looking at how we approach uplift when we do this sort of thing is really important. I'm sure you're all brilliant at it, but we definitely come across organisations that really struggle with working out what you're supposed to do in response to these sorts of laws. So I thought it'd be useful to just step through how we go about it. So the first thing to do is to conduct a gap analysis, looking at what you're doing at the moment and then comparing with what you need to be doing in order to comply. So essentially, I would do this as maps. So I'd be looking at the processes that you're operating at the moment or the tools that you're using right now, and look at what you're doing right now, and then map out what would compliant look like and compare the two. What you also want to try and do, because again, this is intending to simplify a number of existing member state regulations, is you want to try and make your environment as simple as possible. So this is also an opportunity to say, is there an easier way to do this that's more consistent across all of the areas that we work in? So at that point, you now go, okay, this is where we're already complying, and this is the workload that we're going to have to get ready for January. Now you're at the point of going through and going, how do we document what we're expecting of people, which is your policies and procedures? We find quite often that this falls down at the point of understanding who's responsible for those policies and procedures. Again, I'm sure you're all brilliant, but we see a lot of organisations where policies don't have policy owners anymore. People don't want to take responsibility for end-to-end processes or for specific data items or tasks because they don't have that responsibility at the moment. Or policies are simply quite well out of date, or it's unclear how sort of comprehensively they've actually been implemented in practice. So this is the point at which you need to open those documents. Are they up to date? Are people following them? Do they know about them? Do they have an owner? And go through and match them against the maps that you've already made for what you want to be doing in order to comply, and get those documented into your policies and procedures. You may find that at this point you start identifying that there's going to be some things that are quite difficult and challenging to do, that might be quite resource hungry. At that point, it's time to look at an impact analysis of the changes so you can work out how best to tackle them. That can help you as well if you can think of several different ways to meet an objective. The impact analysis might help you make the decision about which one to go for. So now we're at the point of agreeing what the approach to change is going to be. We understand the business impact, we understand who is responsible for implementing these and what they've got to get done. And at that point, you're now ready to put your resource plan together, prioritise things, sort out your risk acceptance criteria. So that's going to be, what are you actually going to have done by January, and what are you going to be able to tolerate beyond January, with a view to being compliant, obviously, quickly thereafter. So the next point of that, as you work through your action plan, is you need to make sure that you're training people on the new requirements of them. Now, that can be a bunch of things. That might mean that you have certain teams that are going to need to have formal qualifications they don't have at the moment, so they can carry out new tasks. It might mean that you're doing role-based training to people who are used to implementing a process one way. You've now changed it. They've got to do something different. You need to explain to them what. You may need to be providing some decision maker training to help people understand how to make the decisions as you go through the project. So here we're looking at what is the needs analysis for training. What's your plan going to be? How are you going to log whether people are completing the training? What metrics are you going to look at to see whether the training is actually working for you or not? And what are the consequences going to be for individuals who need to be trained, but it may be a struggle to get them trained? Now you're ready to do the training. So get that rolled out. Who's going to deliver the training is a really big question. You do ideally want that to be somebody who can combine subject matter expertise with an actual ability to train. They are not the same thing. Somebody who's good at training is a special beast, but they do need to understand what they're training in, because people will have questions. And then finally, as you go through all of this process, you need to be making sure that you're measuring the effectiveness of what you're doing. So are you having the impact that you want on the risk? And that's the risk around your actual threat environment, but also the risk that you've got of non-compliance. Is the way that you're doing that achieving your aims without excessively having an impact on your operations? Is your target maturity state right? Can you keep improving? How are you building in that continuous improvement process? So very quickly, there's a case study at the bottom. So we're just talking about what we did with one of our big clients here who had a new law that they needed to implement in the UAE. And we used this approach to help them to do that. So if we can move on to the next slide, Kai. Yep, there we go. Thank you. So I just wanted to look at some of the traps that organisations can quite often find, which can be really big challenges with implementing a new law. So the first one is you haven't got your processes mapped. It's incredibly common. If you don't know how your processes are operating, it's really difficult to change them, unsurprisingly. And I've seen it quite common in a lot of organisations that you don't have any maps at all. The maps are incomplete. And the effect of that can be that people who are upstream within a process don't actually understand who is downstream of the process. And so if you don't have that end-to-end view, you can end up making decisions that have knock-on consequences that weren't foreseen, that can be quite significant. So really important, if that sounds like you, get that done first. Out-of-date policies and procedures can increase the amount of uplift that you need to do, but it also indicates that people may not be aware of the policies and procedures properly, and that they may not be well implemented. So you're not just implementing a change, you're also implementing, you're also trying to sort of get people to where they should have been and move them forward, so you have a bigger hill to climb, essentially. New requirements that you aren't meeting at all are going to be a challenge. So something new that you have to do, a new process that might require recruitment. Competence gaps, again, could be a recruitment or training challenge. Gaps in your operating model, so you need to think about the way that you actually address things. A lack of resource to do it. Do you have the time to get this done? How are you going to address that? And then finally, there can be a cultural change in your organisation, that you need to think about things a new way. Or there could be something that's unique to your organisation that isn't something that we've seen before. It might happen. And my last point on this one is, don't forget that your gaps can be organisational as well as technical, even with a fairly technical regulation like this one. So that's the end of my piece on the how. I guess we have 10 minutes left for anybody who might be interested in asking any questions. Kai, if you want to move to the next slide. I don't know whether anything's come through. If anybody would like to pop anything into the Q&A or the chat.
It looks like there are no questions so far. I think we'll go to the next slide, if that's okay, Kai, if you don't mind, whilst we wait for potential questions. What I just would like to add a quick comment, if we can. Think there is a slide, if I'm not mistaken, with and if you could carry on, Kai, if you don't mind going to the. I think what I wanted to say is that I wanted to reiterate that there are it can be quite daunting, and a lot of organizations we have spoken to feel that they are not prepared for DORA for January, and but it doesn't mean that that there isn't a conscious effort to put in place the right processes and you know the right effort to match and to aim towards DORA compliance. I think that we have to see DORA as a positive, having a positive impact on our industry, as trying to improve the resiliency for organizations and to put in place things that will have a positive impact on the financial sector and the insurance sector in particular. And what I wanted to add to that is that, and that's something we haven't touched upon, but that you might have different levels of maturity within your own organizations. We've interacted with organizations that are quite advanced. They have perhaps recruited a dedicated person in charge of DORA compliance within their company. Regardless of your level of maturity, what I wanted to reinforce is that as a team, as GemServe and Talon, we're a group, we here, should you wish to organize a gap analysis and a further meeting, a one-to-one session, we'd like to see this as the opportunities to establish a dialogue and to really take this further beyond what we covered today in the webinar. So I think that it can be seen, yes, it can be seen as quite daunting, but I think it is really necessary, and that if your organization is already quite mature and as Ian pointed out, aligned with existing framework and standards, it might not be as daunting as some might think. I just wanted to finish that. Should you have any questions, we are all available as well throughout LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, feel free. And there is my contact details as well. I think if you have the ability to share my contact details, we are happy to talk and to discuss. And have a detailed analysis and assessment of your needs, if any. And I think that's it from my side.
Jalil, we have one question from Paul Calvert in the chat, just asking whether it's possible for people to circulate the slides or recording internally. And yes, of course, you'll be able to do that. So that will be sent out after this webinar finishes, and you are most welcome to share that internally.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for attending the webinar. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon.
Super. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.